Well, I guess we're getting to now we're getting into things of concepts of the soul, right? Conceptions of what is the essential value to be human, right? Big questions to answer.
The baseline is designed to create an emotional response.
I've seen things you won't believe.
More human than human.
Make you question everything.
I miss the 80s.
Yeah.
And I always try to have this self-analysis. Have I changed or has the world changed? And everybody tells me, well, probably both have changed, really.
Yeah.
But there's something, I don't know whether I've reached a point in my life now where I look back at the 80s, the 90s. It just seems so simpler and more joyful.
Yeah.
Pre-internet.
I think, and if you look at music as well, the whole shift from analog to digital, a lot of digital stuff feels more plastic, whereas, analog feels like it's got weight. And I think if I think about the shows I watched as a kid, I was watching Transformers, I was watching Visionaries. I think I'd watched the film Terminator before I was 8. Whereas if I think about what my kids watch...
I think it might have been an 18, that one. I think that is a statement of the 80s in itself.
Yeah, exactly. It's a bit more sanitized. Well, at the same time, I've found that because there's such a proliferation of everything, your view is shaped by sometimes quite a narrow lens. And I think just the quantity of opportunity can be overwhelming. And I find that sometimes with music as well, isn't it? It's like, there's such a big range, you almost kind of stay a bit focused or a bit narrow. So I think sometimes, what the future has given us can sometimes be too much, or it's almost kind of like a synthesized version.
Do you think we'll all become the same?
I don't think so. I hope
to your
not.
point, if all of the information is proliferated to everybody and distributed by algorithms, do we not lose a sense of place? Because our opening conversation about Cornwall, Cornwall shapes the people. The fishermen, the men and women who work and live in Cornwall, they wear Cornwall. There's a weather, there's a sense of place. And the food, the people. That like in winemaking, you call it the terroir. It's all of these environmental elements that go to create this expression of place within the grape and the wine. If we're all consuming algorithmically distributed media, do we all, to one extent, become the same and we lose that sense of diversity and place within our actual identity?
It's differentiation, isn't it? I think the danger with a lot of algorithmic related stuff or AI generated content is you're always a couple of standard deviations from the mean, aren't you? Or you're closer to the average. So I think then that differentiation of originality, or what is an outlier but it's a trendsetter, can sometimes feel harder to see.
Do you know, part of the inspiration for the baseline music, I've got an amazing friend I've known for a long time called Matt Large, who put it together for us, but was the whole 80s, 90s sci-fi era. And for quite a while I've been listening to Purple Disco Machine. I'm absolutely loving that whole amazing. Amazing. That whole
neo disco kind of disco vibe.
Is it Exotica? That album is I think the best album I've listened to for years. For some reason I never get bored of it. I think it uses musical and triggers to just keep you loving the music. So I went through this whole phase of like retro synth, and then yesterday I went somewhere that I would never usually go, which was McDonald's, and I had a coffee, and there was some music on, and it was Rap Boy. I don't know if you heard of Rap Boy.
No.
Oh, amazing!
Check it out.
Like real vocals, real music. I don't know to what extent it's been synthesized or augmented with technology, but it just felt so raw and enjoyable. I think the track is about, not Dystopia, about what's that area of a city where everybody moved out to? Everybody
Suburbs.
The suburbia, not dystopia. Suburbia.
Suburban. Suburban.
Suburbia
Malay.
Calling or something it's called.
Yeah.
Rap Boy.
Yeah.
Oh, amazing music.
I actually this week. So LL Cool J released a new album this week, and I have to say it's fantastic. I've really, really enjoyed it, and it's almost a bit of a harkening back to that '90s sound. So that's been something I've been enjoying.
Is it the real LL Cool J, or is it all of LL Cool J's
is it his
music?
Proxy? His AI proxy?
Right. So you could take all of his music, turn it into a learning model, use that to train a machine learning algorithm, and that machine algorithm would inference that style within its musical vectoring to create new music.
Yeah.
So you could create an LL Cool J style track about a contemporary event, which you couldn't possibly have done, with the full style.
Yeah.
Now that is amazing. Now we get into copyright, identity. Yeah. It's a whole minefield. What a powerful technology.
Yeah, really. Yeah, I mean, as someone who likes making music, I have found that my sort of application of the AI innovation has come more through doing things like signal processing. Like, for example, there's a really cool tool called Lalal AI, and that's very good if you want to strip out, say, the a cappella from a track and have an instrumental, which again, if you're DJing, that's a really great tool. Equally, when it comes to things like mastering and mixing, there are AI tools out there that can sort of give you pretty much the direction of the sound you want to go. If it knows this is a bass line or this is a drum, it's kind of how it wants to sound, and then you can sort of tweak. So it's getting to that sort of 80% good. What I've done less, and maybe because it's a hobby or something that I'm really passionate about and love, is use some of these things like audio and some of these music, like generating a complete song. I think because I'm still in to the passion and the hobby of doing that myself, I don't want the AI to do everything. Versus, I'm not an artist like a painter, so I do quite enjoy using things like MageSpace, which uses Mid-Journey and Stable Diffusion and creates some images, but that's more just for fun.
So when we talk about that example you used, the a cappella removal, which is slightly out of my knowledge, how would you have traditionally done that piece of work? How long would it have taken? Is it an objective outcome or an artistic subjective outcome?
It's difficult. Yeah, difficult. I mean, you'd have used basic EQs, so you'd try and isolate, say, the range that your voice exists within a song. So you might kill some of the bass. But the problem with doing any of that is it's not a clean version. You can also do something called phase cancellation. So if you had a song with a vocal and you had the perfect instrumental version and you played the inverse of the instrumental version, the waves would cancel out and leave you with effectively what's not there, which is the voice.
Is that how noise cancelling earphones work?
It does, yeah. They listen to the outside world and play the inverse.
What effect does that have on your eardrum? Because I was trying to work out, if there's a 10 decibel noise, does the noise cancelling earphone have to create a inversely 10 decibel noise, and therefore your ear is just being battered? I couldn't work out.
Well, I think more the point is that you don't hear it. So it's not like you're getting that 10 decibel noise in, because it's kind of eliminating. If I'm honest, my level of sort of scientific knowledge, I understand the concept.
It's where we start to trust in the technology, I suppose.
Yeah.
But you seem to have a deep passion for music, yet you're working in connecting people and businesses.
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit, how did that journey happen?
I guess it starts with your parents, doesn't it? So my mum and dad had a new wave synth pop band in the 80s. So sort of grew up with Korg MS-10 synthesizers sort of around my house. And my dad was sort of an early electronic engineer, I guess. I mean, they're both PhD scientists. So he was making sort of triggering equipment before MIDI, which is the language that musical systems use to sort of keep time or trigger things. So I kind of always grew up with that around, and that sort of speaks to that whole kind of sci-fi, scientific, technical, I guess, kind of aesthetic. So I think it's always kind of been in there, in the consciousness.
And so the music came from that, but then getting into the business of people, and talent. Are those skills, did they arise from this application within music, or did you find that on a separate journey? How did you make that kind of?
Yeah, I think that's a separate journey. I mean, I kind of think of myself as a bit of a frustrated technologist, if I'm honest. My maths was never good enough to really get into some of the coding and some of the development, although I did things like computer science, as A-level subjects. So yeah, as I said, both my parents were PhD scientists. My sister's actually a PhD, so I sort of joke that I'm the intellectual runt to the family. But I've always got my energy from people. So I think, working in executive search and recruitment, you're sort of privileged to stand across the edge of the envelope when it comes to some of these emerging technologies, or, what's happening, where's the sort of the interesting part of a market and kind of where's it going. And I think as someone who's always had a sort of a rich understanding of the content, but not being an actual, developer or someone who's actually sort of on the coalface doing some of that engineering, I think I've always taken the value from sort of building those relationships, creating those opportunities, synthesizing that understanding, and sort of being able to play it back as well. Because I think that's.
Do you follow football, Premier League?
I do. I'm not as big a fan as my wife, who's a season ticket holder, but I do like football at Chelsea.
Jane, you're making me very envious.
My family actually, on my mum's side, they're all Liverpudlians, so they're all. My gran would sort of proudly tell you she was born within the sound of the cop.
Of course. So tell me. Do you think football managers? Do you think they need to have been great footballers? Do you think they need to have lived the on-pitch experience to be able to effectively manage from the sideline? Because when I look at the greats, Sir Alex Ferguson and others who maybe didn't have the on-pitch, even Pep Guardiola, who arguably is the, greatest of all football managers, out of the Barcelona, Nou Camp, Johan Cruyff, total football kind of school, which is also, gave birth to Arteta and Marqueza, and there's all sorts. It's amazing to get into.
Yeah.
But some of the great footballers who've moved to be managers, Wayne Rooney, arguably one of the best footballers that ever lived.
Yeah.
And is there a dislocation there? Do you think? How does that fit together?
I think management is a skill distinct from whatever you're managing. I think it helps contextually to understand, what are we doing here? And, maybe even putting yourself on the shop floor and thinking, well, what did I do? But I think actually in terms of driving results or driving analysis, sometimes I think it takes that abstraction or, that in itself is a professionalization or a skill set, isn't it? Separate from, and I think you see this in business a lot of the time as well. If you're a good technologist or you're a good sort of individual contributor, within a lot of organizational structures, becoming more senior means becoming a manager. And you might be a fantastic technologist, but it doesn't necessarily make you a great manager. But I guess that's true of several different facets.
So how do you identify talent, and how do you, in your role, look for management capability or executive skills, whatever that may be, without just looking at vocational experience?
Yeah.
I think my point is, I look at Manchester United at the moment. I look at Dave Brailsford, who absolutely excelled at Team Sky in professional cycling, and he's now porting himself into, so as not, I don't know whether he was a cyclist, probably loves cycling, but I don't think he was ever a professional footballer. Yeah. So now he's taken this almost psychology skill set and, performance optimization skill set and applying it to football. Like, how do you identify those bridges between different industries to avoid people kind of getting stuck into one mode of industry?
I think you've got to be good at synthesizing different data sources. And what I mean by that is, we will look for, and I think I always think about sort of people's company DNA. You know, what moments in their journey as an expert in whichever field are they doing? You know, who were their peers? Who were they shaped by? So I kind of think about almost like the genealogy of someone's skill set. I think then we also have to speak to their managers. You know, speak to people who work for them. You know, you've got to kind of bring that view as well as then your own assessment. And then, you know, clearly things like psychometrics, those sort of tools can also be useful. But I think part of the skill is actually being able to look across all of those inputs and actually divine and, you know, bring and share some value.
Where do you think AI can fit to this right now? And do you believe what you have is a human talent? And if so, do you believe AI can replace or replicate that?
I think it is a human talent, but I think we would say that as the humans sat on this side of the table, right? So if I think about where AI is speeding up or simplifying some of our processes in the executive search and recruitment world, I think it's that ability to synthesize large unstructured data sets more quickly, or understand particular topics or prep for a meeting. You know, something like Perplexity AI, for example, is a really fantastic research tool that we can use to kind of augment and speed up some of our understanding, or at least get you to sort of 80%, which I think leaves you the time to have the human interaction.
So do you know how Perplexity AI works?
Not on a technical level.
Do you trust it?
I trust it to the degree that I would take different data sources and kind of think, does it pass the sniff test? Right.
Interesting. So you're leveraging AI tools to do specific workloads, but what you're also doing is you're verifying maybe with a human. But your verification, does it need to align to what you'd achieved as a human? Like, do you look to gauge AI's capability by working out, is it replicating human behavior?
Yeah, that's interesting.
Do you believe an AI is verified when it replicates what you would have done manually?
Hard to know without doing the work.
Because that feels like automation.
Yeah.
It feels like automation, not cognitive capability.
Yeah, true. Yeah. So I guess what you're asking is the value coming from me osmosing that information and making my inference, which I guess it is, right?
Yeah, like if AI did something that created an outcome that you wouldn't have created manually, would you choose to change your own personal opinion or disagree with its outcome?
Yeah, very, very contextual question, that, isn't it? I think it would depend on the context, really. I think if it didn't feel like an output that I would have necessarily made myself, I think it would drive me to go a step further and actually explore, you know, what is that data point? Is that, you know, is my contextual understanding or situational awareness not aware of this outlier, or is that actually incorrect?
It's an interesting transition, because and this is not you shouldn't feel defensive, because I think this is where we actually are as people.
Yeah.
When we come across something new, I guess ABS braking is maybe an example on cars. I'm sure that when people initially got ABS, they still, you know, a good driver would gently press the brake, maybe pulse brake to make sure, not realizing there was this technology that you could just slam your foot on the thing. But they probably still didn't choose to slam. There was an art, a craftsmanship in what they were doing. Yeah. And over time, the theory could go, as there were a few edge cases where the human intervention maybe failed and ABS cut in, and they realized to get comfort that there was a safety level, then over time, your ability to manually brake and pulse brake completely emaciates, and you completely trust in the machine. Yeah. So it's that, if we're agreeing, which I think
I think we are,
is kind of broadly right in terms of the adoption and then trusting technology over time through experiences. It feels like, from how you're talking, you're in the first 20%, the first 20% of that journey.
Yeah,
whereas
absolutely.
You're applying your personal talent and craft and leveraging the tool to possibly accelerate or augment it. But if it comes up with a spurious response that wouldn't align with you, you're kind of stepping back and maybe analysing more. Would that fit?
I think that's right. I think also it's the context of where I think a lot of the work we do resides at the moment feels like it still remains within the value of the human interactions and the relationships that we built, which, that is, touch wood, I hope, not being automated. I think the danger is where AI kind of removes the human value, right? I think augmenting the value is what
the danger. Danger of what? So if AI removes human value, what are we left with?
Yeah, what are we left with? Well, that's a great question. Probably not a lot to do, right? But I mean, if I think about
laugh, I feel as I want to cry.
Yeah, well, that's it. Yeah, there's evident opportunity for dystopia, right? I mean, if I think about in the processes that we work in executive search and recruitment, I think where I've seen automation happen, I think that's really eroded the value of the process itself. So, for example, there are a lot of firms that are now doing graduate recruitment where a graduate has to do a video call with an AI or a machine that's looking at some of their responses, how they answer questions, were they flustered, what is the tone and inflection in their voice. So that is a very impersonal experience, particularly as an early stage career person, where you're coming into an unknown environment and you're kind of you're being tested, and some of this stuff's being automated. I think that erodes some of the essential value of what we do as humans, right? Which is connect, which is work together, which is build stuff, enjoy time, find that value as a communal animal.
Just to process what you're saying, so if someone is going for a first engagement with a potential employer, I think what you're saying is that first interface through a online video call is done via an AI. Is that correct?
Yeah, for some, I've heard it in some cases.
Do you not think that sets does that not set a dangerous precedent where the human is somehow subservient to the machine and sets a psychological leveling that, hang on, my initial engagement with this organization, its culture is that of it respects the human over the machine.
Yeah, I think it's a huge danger. And also what, as you said, what precedent are we setting, but also what experience is that giving the individual? I think it's great to automate certain parts of processes, whether it be things like research identification, right? Some of that stuff let's call it desk-based or kind of back office. But the real value, and I think of what we're doing and what anyone's doing, where it's a sort of a human to human kind of interaction, is having that in person, right? And actually having the human element shine through.
What is the human? I mean, in my mind, I'm thinking if we can create systems that replicate humans through, deep learning models, their ability to generate, emotional inflection in speech, to introduce imperfections of humanity, to create something that is so anti-synthetic that we perceive it as human nature. And in some ways, I don't believe we're away from that. I don't think it's sentient, but we can create something that feels like it. What do you think it would be missing that a human would have? Like what?
Well, I guess we're getting to now we're getting into things of concepts of the soul, right? Conceptions of what is the essential value to be human, right? Big questions to answer.
And do you have a view of what that is in your experience of working every day with people? Diverse people of all sorts of states, also diverse of the state of mind. We're in a very hard economic time. There's lots of organizations that are becoming leaner, and there's more people available looking for jobs. People who are extremely experienced, knowledgeable, and capable. How does that, as a recruiter, do you have? I think you're more than a recruiter, Gene. You're somebody who has a deep sense of connecting people and opportunities. But do you have a moral obligation to the person over the machine? Do you feel as though you want to prefer? Because in some ways it's bias against AI.
I think we've got to be biased towards the human, because I think, And this comes to things like, I guess, the EU AI Act, right? I think there's a really interesting sort of situation playing out right now where, this new AI technology is clearly running forwards extremely quickly. Do we seek to control that? If so, how? I do think about high-risk systems, right? Solutions that are going to make a meaningful impact on someone's life. So things like, credit decisioning, recruitment, should they get this job or not? And I think that's where we need to be aware and have some sort of system of control or risk management and mitigation.
But as a sense of empathy for
empathy, exactly. Yeah, and I guess that is probably the essential human value in many respects, isn't it?
I think that if we're, in some ways, I was thinking, if we're optimizing for the well-being of the human, and you take a scenario, say, underwater pipeline engineering.
Yeah.
Like we've moved to robots to do that. Mm-hmm. Right? We have machines that they can handle submerged depths. They can operate in zero darkness.
Yeah.
These are inhospitable places for humanity. Yeah. So what we've opted to
dangerous jobs.
But we've tried to remove risk to humanity by automating and machining. And if a machine gets lost at the bottom of the ocean, look, we accept it as a financial write-off and an impact on project timeline, but we haven't impacted on families, on people, on emotion, on that whole human dynamic. Is there a perspective to say, taking away physical risk, there's also roles that present mental risk to humans, dealing with people who maybe aren't able to pay loans back, who are in poverty or in strife. I know a good friend of mine works for the Samaritans, handling terrible, sad cases, and the context in which they're working does impact their mental health.
Yeah.
And is there an argument to say, whilst they are the most sensitive of transactions and engagements that do require human empathy, the toll on the human who's servicing it is so great, like the submerged machine, there is a physical risk.
Yeah.
Is there an opportunity to remove humans from roles that present mental risk and replace them with machines?
Yeah. I think it's got to come down to the individual's choice, hasn't it? You take working in the NHS as an example, how challenging physically, mentally,
hugely
debilitating. You're really seeing sort of the most difficult parts of the human experience there, aren't you? But people do that. Why do they do that? They choose to do that. They have a sense of purpose, a passion to look after people, and that is dangerous work, right? So I think we don't want to automate that away. And I guess this also goes back to the point I was kind of making around sort of the automation of the recruitment process is, I want that to be a human experience, right? Would I want that to be a machine? Even if it could maybe look after me in some ways better, I think I'd kind of want that to be a person.
We've stumbled on something here that I haven't thought of, which is purpose.
Purpose, yeah.
And in some ways, purpose requires hardship, I think, to feel of value. If we look to optimize everything with machines or artificial intelligence, what are we left with in terms of purpose for humanity?
Yeah. Well, that's it. And I guess this also speaks to, does the machine have purpose? Because it's been programmed to serve a purpose, but does it intrinsically have that value of purpose itself? Because it's a synthetic of something that has come from somewhere else, right? And I guess, thinking about this in a bit more detail, that probably is one of the most quintessential human things, purpose, right? Empathy, purpose.
I remember reading a book, I think it was written by the Unabomber.
Oh, yeah.
Who said that humans can operate within 3 states. Easy things that are achievable.
Yeah.
Hard things that are achievable.
Yeah.
Or hard things that are unachievable. And these 3 states
Interesting way of breaking it down.
We can choose to operate in one of those three.
Yeah.
And I believe his view was that if we operate where things are just easy and easy to achieve, they're deeply unfulfilling.
Yeah.
If they're really hard but impossible to achieve, they're kind of equally as unfulfilling.
Yeah.
Whereas there's this middle point where it's hard but achievable.
Yes.
And humans need to exist within that state to be happy.
Yeah. Yeah.
He's and I think this may be close to your whole family. His then projected behavior was to try and destroy educational institutions, manufacturing institutions that were effectively building things to make things easier for humans, because fundamentally, if everything was easy, there was no purpose.
No purpose, yeah.
So whilst I totally disagree with the actions, I think the hypothesis on operating within a specific area to create joy and sustainable happiness is fascinating and feels relevant as AI starts to invade our sense of things that are achievable but difficult.
Well, this is where I guess value and progress feels like it must come from some amount of hardship, right? If it's too easy, if I press a button and generate the piece of art, does that art have value, right? So I think we're sort of experiencing, we're looking through that lens, aren't we?
So as you look to position people in roles and match them to opportunities, how do you get a sense that that person, do you try and get a sense that this is something that's going to be difficult but achievable? Do you try and position that layer?
I think we have to at two ends of the process. I think there's the piece around, when you're working with the client, when you're understanding the brief, I think we have to understand the landscape for success. Is that landscape achievable or is it unachievable? Is it actually achievable with one person, with one hire? Is it actually two different people, in fact, to solve that? And then I guess you look into, quote unquote, the solution to that exam question, which is obviously the hires themselves and the individuals. And invariably, you're then looking at kind of thinking, well, this puzzle piece is going to solve 80% of this, but actually maybe the 20% is development, right? And that's where you start to mine for, potentiality, and kind of looking at that bit and thinking that actually this is a job that's going to suit somebody that can develop with the organization, because maybe where they're going they don't know yet. Versus, I guess, another scenario is where you kind of you want the quote unquote the safe bet, right? The individual who's been there and done that before. So yeah, I think those are some of the things I try and divine and look towards within that process.
Do you think you're better in your role now than you were 5 years ago, 10 years ago? Do you think you're better at that role?
I do. I mean, I think lots of reasons. I mean, lived experience, I think, is a really important thing. And if I even think about research tools that we use that I would have used when I was in my 20s, plugging in certain values or certain ways to search and find and identify people, I'm so much faster at that now. And I have so many more. It's almost like if you're a developer, right? You have certain solutions and, recursive things that you can come back to and shortcuts, etc. So I think that element, I definitely feel much better equipped. I think also as you naturally move through something like executive search, as you're getting older, that gap between your peer group and the people you're recruiting shortens. I think that does actually help as well, because you've then got some of the same lived experiences. So your kind of assessment criteria and your understanding of the whole individual sort of naturally moves forward as well. But I think, look, you've got to stay fresh, right? And you've got to stay open-minded. I like to think about it as more the difference between a fixed mindset and a growth mindset.
What do you do differently now than you didn't used to do? What are the things that you feel as though you're doing now that you maybe didn't do when you were younger?
Yeah, great question. I think I don't try and always slot the puzzle piece into the position. I think I try and step back from the painting a little bit and think, actually, what is this meant to be a painting of? And then think about that solution more holistically. Whereas I think when you're earlier in your career, you kind of think, oh, well, here's a solution. Let me try and solve that solution quickly. But speed and quality, aren't necessarily proportionally related, are they? So I think I try and abstract a little more and just appreciate that, maybe taking 3 steps over here on the journey is actually going to lead us to a better end result.
Jane, whilst you don't have the PhD on your name, the way you apply science and process to your role, I think you've probably exceeded PhD level within your vocation.
Yeah, well, it's nice to know.
It's fascinating to see, and everybody I've spoke to holds you in such high regard and has the deepest respect of what you do and what you're achieving. So whilst you don't have the PhD, I think you've already exceeded that within vocation.
Yeah.
You're very welcome. But it leads me to a real question that I would love the answer to. As we sit here now in 2024, do you believe university and education and structured education, academia, shall we say, is as or more important than vocation? So for somebody coming out of school, or even actually to take away age completely, if somebody's sitting in a situation now where maybe they're not in a role, and they're looking at a proliferation of education courses, academia, or moving back into vocation, how do you think about that now?
Yeah. I think there's so many routes to success now. I think we need to be aware of that, and I'm very cognizant of that as a parent, right? Myself, and I look at my kids and I think, what are they good at? How do I guide them? What do you think about? I think academia, they're vital centers in terms of progressing things like research or let's say more sort of technical skills, qualifications. I think we need those centers of innovation, to persist and proliferate. But, if I think about when I started my career in recruitment, it was very much driven around, what does this person's CV say? What university did they go to? Did they get a B in their A levels? It was quite a prescriptive way of looking at individuals, I'd say, several years ago. If you think now, you could join somewhere like Deloitte as an apprentice. You could maybe not go to university and get yourself in hundreds of thousands of pounds worth of debt, move up the ranks and sort of still achieve that executive job that, you would have to have gone down a certain route, kind of back in the day. So I think we need to be cognizant of those different paths, really.
I also see, and maybe you could shed some light in the type of roles that you see in organizations, but I kind of see private business and public business, but business reaching back into
some almost, of that vocational,
like pseudo innovation, academic innovation. Companies working with companies like AstraZeneca, certain pharmaceuticals. We've seen,
100%.
I feel that the private sector overlaps somewhat to education, academic education, universities, etc. And some of the people I've met at amazing companies like Rolls-Royce and AstraZeneca, the depth of scientific exploration they're doing is mind-blowing.
And I think it's really essential. You see, there are a lot of these technology centers linked to universities where businesses like a Rolls-Royce or a Jaguar Land Rover or an AstraZeneca will come in, and they will obviously be using PhD scientists and individuals that have obviously completed some of that journey to solve some of the problems and kind of bring together, I guess, that academic and business side, which I think is going to continue to be important for the next 100 years, right?
Do you like when you look at influencers? I mean, Elon Musk, an example that not only is a business, but also an innovator in academia, and now almost a pseudo-political figure. I believe he's just past 200 million followers on the X platform, which he owns. To what extent are people influenced by individuals like Elon Musk? Do you see in your role of kind of meeting lots of people who are in that motion of looking for roles?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's something that I've always been hugely cognizant of, being the generation that sort of grew up pre-social media to now this huge proliferation to now, I mean, my kids are still single digit ages, coming into double digit ages. I look at the people who have teens and kids in their 20s now, where their kind of worldview is so shaped by these things. Yeah, massive influence, which again goes back to the part of our conversation where I think a level of human assurance, a level of like, test that influence, test that statement, absolutely vital. I think we're living in the time now more than ever. US elections coming up, great theatre where some of that stuff's being played out, right? Where we've got to be absolutely all over that sort of consideration.
In your role, how do you avoid, in terms of expectation setting? It's very easy to see people on social media, whether it be socially or even vocationally.
Yeah.
Certainly, I see a lot of people on social media who identify as entrepreneurs who are in Ferraris, who are displaying some form of material success through what I would say is money. Is the materialistic association of success, which I personally would question whether that's real or not.
Yeah.
But is there a sense that social media sets expectations in some ways so high for successful entrepreneurs that anything anybody can achieve is never going to be seen as themselves as a success because of these artificial, manufactured representations of what a successful entrepreneur is?
Yeah. Well, I think,
how do you manage those expectations within people who are coming into the system?
Yeah, I think it's back to that piece of questioning, and what do we set as our role models? You raised yourself, Elon Musk. Is that someone who should be a role model? They are in many senses. Maybe they're not in others. And I guess with something like social media and the concept of fashion models, that's really brought that into very sharp focus. And how does that then play into people's lives, decision? Maybe lead to adverse behaviors, eating disorders, these sort of things. So I think it's always a case of questioning the reality or the data or the machine or the result or the social media or the post.
If expectations on physical, mental, vocational success, financial success, are in this blurry phase of completely, photoshopped, completely manufactured and digitally represented, it is set an expectation. AI is only going to exacerbate that, because potentially AI could be used to generate even more extreme physical shapes,
and more realistic
success
as well, harder to
more believable,
more
believable. Realism becomes highly subjective.
Absolutely.
In terms of the ability to have a body or muscular, How are we as a society, certainly as parents, going to help our children traverse such a digitally inauthentic set of expectations?
I think of it in terms of trying to balance the digital and the analog, isn't it? If your world was completely digitally created, then what world are you living in? Versus I think you've got to kind of almost, get outside, run around, get off the phone, go and cycle from Land's End, right? I think it's striking that balance. And I guess the danger for a generation that has grown up only in the digital context is they're not going to be grounded with the same norms that maybe you or and I grew up with. I always laugh thinking back to being at school and, we had the internet, but the internet was one machine in the library and it was so slow, it was quicker not to use it, and that sounds like such a crazy aging statement now. When people are generating their entire theses with AI or augmenting or research tools, all the things we talked about today. So I think it's being able to understand that interplay between the physical and the digital world.
How do you verify people's CVs with these, OpenAI tools? How do you verify that person has actually created
Yeah.
that, or is that just a synthetic representation?
I think it comes down to referencing, really.
Interesting.
And a lot of this is kind of to some degree based on the wisdom of crowds, right? You've got to go and speak to, did that individual do that thing? A lot of people would play up some of the achievements in their CV, but if you go and talk to the person who managed them, people who work for them, etc., then I think you can verify some of that information. I think some of it also comes down to experience, right? If you've met 20 people that do this thing, and you've got an idea of what good looks like in that frame, you can also reference with your understanding and sentiment as well as those around them.
Fascinating, the wisdom of crowds and validation through group application. Everybody is going to have a positive lens on their own history. So there's always going to be some, and some people would call that hustling. They'd call it a positive thing. They're making the most of what they got. I feel as though there's a human obligation to make the best of a situation, but at which point does it feel like inauthenticity? I guess. I mean, how do you if somebody did something objectively, they frame the impact as X. Where do you say, okay, you've gone too far?
I think if it's disingenuous or it's a lie, then you've immediately got to cast that
that's
out.
blind.
I think also success has many fathers, right? Failure is an orphan.
Of course.
So but then there's a lot to be learned and gained from failing, right? In a lot of the roles or examples that we would recruit for, actually someone who's failed in the task can be more valuable than someone who's succeeded. So I think it's the balance of truth and the application.
Failure, it touches me. I mean, there's a very interesting point that I struggled with in one of my businesses, which was finding product market fit.
And really tricky. Really tricky.
We had some amazing opportunities that we closed, significant deals, couldn't find repetition. And in some ways, it was the worst scenario because there was enough success to make you believe there has been some repetition. We could find product market fit. This is a scalable and repeatable opportunity. However, how it manifested itself, the failure to find product market fit, was dissatisfaction with recruitment, throwing people at the problem, and high turnover, internal dissatisfaction, volatility, which already you're starting to create behavioral trends that are trending away from success. And if I could have worked out, look, we don't have market fit, we've got some outliers, let's stop trying to throw people at this problem until we've really diagnosed for what component is repeatable. If it's not repeatable, let's slow down, step back, rethink. But instead, I kind of pushed on, searched for market fit with different teams. And my failure manifested itself in my ability to identify that it wasn't a people problem, it was a market problem.
And a productization problem, right? We see this all the time with maybe innovative businesses or businesses that have a particular product. Now, you'll know yourself, obviously, being from an illustrious software background, that you need that to be repeatable. It needs to be out the box. It needs to be installable with some minor configurations, right? I think the danger, and maybe what you got me thinking about there, is I've seen a few organizations where they have a product, but every installation is so bespoke, requires such a big services wrapper around it. Actually, what you're doing is more services than it is product, right? So I think that,
part of your experience and knowledge must be guiding. So if a company comes to you and says, look, we're in this motion, we're struggling with repeatability, we need X, Y, and Z, your ability to reflect and say, well, let's think about this. Do we not need some DNA that is more thoughtful and questioning to find repeat?
Well, actually,
it's part of your role, helping and guiding.
Yeah, it is. And actually, I think that's probably one of the things that's really kept me in the job. And you kind of asked me earlier on, what do I do now that I didn't do at the beginning, or, what value do I have now? And I think it is that more strategic advisory experience. What I really love is being part of an ecosystem where you can help inform and advise or connect that ecosystem, right? Not just buyers and sellers, but maybe people working on a problem set over here that's quite specific and quite deep and quite narrow, to the people who are maybe going to osmose and actually consume that solution, maybe to the people that are then in a different part of the ecosystem, either funding that solution or informing further up the supply chain part of that solution. So I think, being connected to that process and that ecosystem is, I think, where our value really comes from. And that's kind of the piece that I think it takes time to build up those connections, that understanding, those relationships, to really be able to help inform that and kind of give back.
What do you do outside of this? It seems like that you're living and breathing this, Jane. The way you talk about it, the way you articulate yourself around the craft, it feels like quite all-consuming.
Yeah, but I mean, I think...
How do you find a balance?
Yeah, I really love making music and DJing. It's probably one of my biggest sort of hobbies in the spare time. And actually that, probably more than music making, because I'm definitely an extrovert, but making music is quite an introverted thing. That's when I'm at my computer, generally on my own, tinkering away. So that's fun. I think, look, having a family is about the most challenging and rewarding thing I think you can do, right? So spending time with the family, fun with the kids, seems obvious to say, but I think that's what gives you your energy, sort of keeps you young, keeps you fun.
How are you preparing them for this AI augmented world as a parent? What are you?
It's a great question. So, I mean, my kids are 9 and 6 at the moment, so they're just sort of getting into, they're using computers for school, they understand tools, they're starting to do research, clearly they know about the internet and that type of thing. So I think it's, I'm trying to help them be technical to the degree that I think they want to be and they kind of would like to be. I think having some sort of skills in coding and, stuff like Scratch, for example, that MIT language where kids can do stuff with blocks, that's great for them, right? Just so they even have the context, because that's a context, I didn't necessarily have. I think it's some of those things, but at the same time, I want them to be their own people, right? I don't want to, sort of force them to go down a path which wouldn't have been the one that they're either suited for or they would want themselves, right?
Gaming is becoming so realistic.
Yeah.
I don't know whether your children.
Yeah, we played it. Yeah, I grew up, again, my dad he used to download old games on a bulletin board, right? The old kind of dial up. So I grew up with a computer since I was 2, so naturally, grew up as a gamer, and I play games with my kids now, which is actually they're that sort of age where you can have that sort of shared experience.
I've got
together.
to a point now where my children could beat me at FC24.
At almost everything.
They could beat me now. and there was, I've always played computer games and enjoyed them. I find it a great relief and stress reducer.
Yeah.
But I got quite good at FIFA.
Yeah.
And my eldest, who is 8,
right,
he can do the rainbow flick over my character, whiz around, and then score from the halfway line. And I'm looking at the controller, thinking, what's going on? And there was this point in time where I looked at him and I thought, I'm done here.
The student has become the master.
Indeed. There is an interesting point on gaming that I thought I would ask you about in terms of vocation. Gaming and work are overlapping. There's a movie about drone flying. I think it's with Russell, the Australian actor who plays Russell Crowe, and he flies a drone.
Right.
So he's in this, office a couple of miles from his home, and he's also in a battlefield flying a drone. It's a great film. I really enjoyed it. Gladiator is also probably the best one of the
Number 2 coming out soon.
Is that right?
Yeah, this year.
Is that right?
Yeah.
So he's flying this drone. So he's doing work. He's flying a drone in Battlefield. And then I look at computer games that people are playing now. There's a game called SnowRunner.
Right, yeah.
And it's like a trucking game where you kind of deliver things to one place to another.
I've seen it.
And I think that I spend an hour on SnowRunner, I think as though I've done an hour of work.
Yeah.
If that was somehow connected to a real truck actually delivering some logs in Ontario, I'd think actually I'd more than happy sit at home simulating driving a trucking platform between a couple of villages and Ontario, dropping the logs off.
Yeah.
Like, I don't feel as though there's a huge step away from, if we're already doing it with drones in the battlefield, from like a working model that goes beyond the Uber driver to actually people gaming actual vocations that are done through the internet and automation.
Yeah, it's totally,
or even human oversight over AI that's doing it. It just feels to me after an hour on Surrey, I think should have been paid for that.
Yeah, well, it's funny. There's a game called the Farming Simulator where you literally are tending a farm and you're doing all the actions, and you're going and you're planting the crops and you're harvesting and you're sowing, so it's interesting, isn't it? And if you look at the current generation of F1 drivers, right, like Lando Norris and some of those guys, they've grown up gaming and they are exceptional in the sim, on the game, but also that's now translating to performance on the track, right? So it's kind of back to that thing of, the individuals growing up with that sort of pure digital experience. And then I guess that's now manifesting in the real world.
Would Formula One be as exciting if only machines were driving themselves without the human?
Yeah, well, back to purpose, right? Would it be fun?
I don't think it, surely it's who's got the best software. It's kind of,
you're watching a simulation then, aren't you? Virtually, yeah.
How far away is Formula One from a simulation?
It's a great question, isn't it? I mean, we work with one of the Formula One teams actually, and they use a huge amount of simulation, obviously not just on the track, but also in their business to actually kind of optimize some of that. So to your question, I mean, there's a huge growing league of simulated F1 kind of racing leagues, but are we getting to a point where we're just going to be watching and betting on, just simulated races? That wouldn't feel fun.
No,
it would be.
So there is something human that we can't quite describe.
Yeah.
That actually makes something come. I mean, for me, when we were talking about football,
I guess it's randomness and luck, right? It's maybe it's purpose, it's endeavor, and it's risk
that you can empathise with.
That you can empathise with, and it's a bit of that randomness and luck. It feels like they're the ingredients that.
Do you know? Although when I was thinking about Gladiator, and I was thinking, does this entertain you?
Yeah.
Do you know, I used to like Robot Wars.
Yeah, of course. That was great. Yeah, but people were controlling those, right?
True. And you did see who was controlling them. I mean, I guess their faces or the tortillas was actually part of the entertainment, right?
Yeah. That was.
But on this whole entertainment thing, Jade, and the way you hold yourself from a scientific and a precision perspective comes across so well, and I've so enjoyed talking. But the difficult question for me really is when we've talked a whole load about recruitment, vocation, purpose, even gaming. Are we moving towards a utopia or dystopia with this technology?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it is the essential question of the podcast, isn't it? So my natural, optimistic, positive, believe in human nature spirit says there's a utopia. But I think the propensity for dystopia is higher. So I think it's there are a lot of pitfalls out there. We don't want to be sleepwalking into Skynet or the Matrix, do we? So
unless we're already there, yeah.
Unless we're already there, yeah. Unplug me and I'll wake up. But I'd like to say utopia, and maybe it's back to that kind of, you abstract everything from the human and kind of what's left. Maybe I'm trying to hide from the dystopia, but yeah, I think the propensity for dystopia is incredibly high.